Okay, so you should have 30.3 insects and their relatives in front of you. By the end of this section, hopefully you are able to describe the characteristics of insects. You're going to compare complete and incomplete metamorphosis. We're going to identify the internal and external structures of the eastern lubber grasshopper, which will be at the end in that up close section that you guys get from the textbook. And then last but not least, we're going to compare millipedes and centipedes with insects because they're just a little bit different but in the same phylum. So we are mostly going to study the subphylum Uniramia. So go ahead and circle that on your notes if it's not already there for you. And then put a box around these three guys. So we're going to talk about millipedes and centipedes, which are class Diplopoda and class Chilopoda, and then lastly class Insecta, which is going to be all the insects. We will talk about a few of these other ones as we go through, but the biggest difference, and I want you to get two color pencils, a blue and a pink, or a blue and a red, purple and a pink, whatever you want to do. And kind of color where we have this split off in our phylogenetic tree right here, where we go clear up on this side, meaning arthropods have jaws or mandibles, which are going to be chewing mouth parts. And then we have a whole different subphylum in phylum Insecta, where there's just going to be fangs and pinchers, but no actual jaws. So instead of having teeth like we do, imagine them just having like little finger pinchers. So what this graph is trying to show us is that over half of pretty much the Insecta group is going to be beetles. So it's 350,000 species belong to Caloptera. And then Diptera are going to be our flies and mosquitoes, easily the most annoying group. And then the Lepidoptera are going to be butterflies and moths. And then the Hymenoptera are going to be ants, wasps, and bees, probably the next most annoying group. But on Earth, insects are going to take up over half. So that includes vertebrates, which is us, polar bears, goats, cats, everything else. The mollusks we've already studied. Protist plants take up quite a bit. But look at insects. Over half of our species include insects on Earth. And they say that there are several million that are still unidentified. So the insect body plan is going to have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. The insects are mostly a terrestrial group, but they did have aquatic ancestors. Most of them are small, okay, so this isn't like a Jurassic Park remake, but we do have some, like the African Goliath beetle that is about 4 inches in length. The warmer the area, usually the insects get larger. So we have larger insects in tropical regions, and that just has to do with their ability to spread their breathing and how they adapt to the humid air and the rain through their skin. But despite the great variation in size and how they look, we do have those 3 distinct head, thorax, and abdomen parts. The head will always have a mandible or a specialized mouth part with 1 pair of antennae. The mandibles are going to be adapted for whatever food they eat, and they will also have a very large compound eye with that antenna that vary in shape. A compound eye meaning that they are able to see not quite like we do, but it's more than light and dark. And then the thorax is going to have 3 fused segments. These are where your walking legs are going to be attached. So notice this is just an ant. All 3 of the legs are attached to the thorax, but they stretch clear up by the head and clear to the back of the abdomen. But the key is that the walking legs are attached here at the thorax. Some have wings, some don't, but if they have them, they're also attached here. And then the abdomen, which is the last section, is going to have 9 to 11 segments with no wings or legs. And this just gives you a good comparison of the different kinds of insect mouth parts. So the grasshopper is going to have a pretty large mandible here because they're going to be cutting and chewing different pieces of animal. They are going to be primarily plant eaters. And then you've got the mosquito that has this very large straw-like structure or labium. And that's because they're going to pierce skin and then suck up with a straw. And then you've got the fly who's got more of a fluffy labium, and that's because they're going to lap, almost like a dog drinking water on a hot day. All insects go through a certain life cycle, and this goes way back to biology and having that growth and development plan, and that's what makes something living. So these life cycles are complex with several molts before an adult stage, and the last molt the insect undergoes is usually a dramatic change. So we've all studied the butterfly in elementary school, where you go from a caterpillar to a butterfly. That dramatic change is called metamorphosis, but not all insects go through that. So in complete metamorphosis, that's where you're gonna see something go from like a caterpillar to a butterfly. You're gonna have very dramatic change. There's gonna be no similarity in the larva form to the adult form. They're going to start with a wingless worm-like larva where it encloses itself in that chrysalis. If you remember what that is, it's that little pouch. And then it's going to pass through the pupa stage in that chrysalis, in which it changes into an adult. The larva can exploit different food sources and habitats than the adults. This helps kind of avoid conflict or competition for resources between, for example, like a mom and a dad and then the babies. For example, the larvae of a butterfly are going to drink nectar where the caterpillars eat leaves. So again, this eliminates all that competition and then increases the chances of survival for each of the life cycle phases. Because if we were to constantly have to compete here with the larva and the butterfly, we may not see as many organisms make it to the adult or the butterfly stage. And then you've got incomplete metamorphosis, which is exactly what it is. There's not a complete dramatic change as metamorphosis would kind of allow. So a smaller number of species do incomplete metamorphosis, but it's just that less dramatic, where the adult is going to lay eggs. You're going to get a nymph that looks very much like the adult, and then a younger adult, which is a little bit bigger, and then the adult, which is the biggest form. So the egg will hatch. It's going to look like a small wingless adult. And then after several molts, the nymph is going to develop into that adult. What's really cool about insects is they were the first animals to have wings. So for more than 100 million years, until the flying reptiles appeared, which is slightly terrifying, insects were the only flying organisms. Okay, so this means they came before birds and anything else that would fly in the sky. And so that was a really, really big evolutionary innovation, to be able to basically reach inaccessible food sources that they didn't have access to before, and they could also escape danger, which would lead back to why it makes so much sense that there are so many organisms that fit into the insect category that take, like we said, over half of the identified living organisms on Earth are insects. And this makes sense because evolutionarily, they were able to overcome that access to food and escape from danger by flying. And so the wings, when they develop from an organism, are going to come from a sac-like growth on the outside of the body, composed entirely of chitin, which is just a very thick protein. It's very, very strong, and it's strengthened by a network of tubes called veins. They actually carry blood and not air, which is why insects are able to fly so high and so fast. The power stroke of the wing is downward, meaning that they're going to get most of their power going down, and it's produced by strong flight muscles. At rest, though, most insects are going to fold their wings over the abdomen, but there are a few, like the dragonflies, that can't. Most animals do have 2 pairs of wings. The biggest exception are fleas and lice that are actually wingless, which is funny because they travel so easy, but they do not have wings. In most species, there's only one set of legs that is used for flight. The second pair of wings, oh, that should say legs, or that should say wings, not legs. The second pair of wings serves another purpose. So for example, grasshoppers and beetles, they're going to use their forewings or the wings on the top as protective wing coverings. And then flies use their hind wings like modified structures to help control stability. What is very interesting to study with insects is how social they are. So there are two orders of insects that have elaborate social systems. It's the Hymenoptera, which remember is the ants, the bees, and the wasps, and then the Isoptera, which are termites. Termites are going to be the things that eat up wood in your house. They live in highly organized societies of genetically related organisms, so basically clones of one another. They're almost the same organism hovering around whatever hive or group that they live with. But there's a marked division of labor. So every single insect has almost like a tier or a rank. And that role is played by an individual in a colony. It's called its caste. So that job, almost like the cast of a play, they all have a special job or a part. It's very similar. And it's determined by a combination of heredity and diet, especially at the larva, and then pheromones. Pheromones are that odor that they give off. Everybody has their own kind of smell. You know, if you wear somebody else's shirt, it smells like them. And that really just comes from a chemical substance that is made in your body. And so you'll have small active workers, like these guys here, that are going to gather food, raise young, and excavate tunnels. So this is in particular is a termite. But then the larger termites are called soldiers, and they're going to defend the colony with immense jaws, and they are all sterile except the king and the queen. And that really gives power to the king and the queen to make sure that they're reproducing in the right numbers. If they ever notice by pheromones from their workers that there is they're stressed or they need more manpower or termite power, you could say, they will go ahead and reproduce with each other to produce more workers or more soldiers, depending on the need of the colony or the hive or whatever group they live with. And then the relatives, the centipedes and the millipedes, they both have similar bodies. Each has a head region that's followed by a lot of segments. So here you've got the very distinct head region here and here, and we know that based on the antenna. Remember, those are the characteristics of insects. They do have eyes and antenna on the front of their head, so we do know that they do have an anterior end. They bear one or two pair of legs depending on what they are. So centipedes have one pair of legs per segment. It can have up to 173 segments. They are all carnivores. And then millipedes can have 11 to 100 segments and have two pair of legs for every segment. And they are herbivores. So very, very different organisms, yet very related. And here's where you guys will turn into your book and do the up-close eastern lubber grasshopper. There are a few on the external end, and then there are also a few on the internal end. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you guys are having a great week.